Hello and welcome to another Tag1 Team Talk episode, the podcast and blog of Tag1 Consulting. I'm Michael Meyers, the managing director of Tag1, and we've got another awesome show for you today. This is part two of our two-part series with Michael Hess, who's one of the leaders of the Drupal Security Working Group and the Drupal Security Team. In today's episode, Michael's going to give us a rare inside look into what the security team does and how they work and operate.
I want to shift gears a little bit. We've talked a lot about the security team and what it is and how it works. You might know where this is going. I want to talk about where it doesn't work, specifically end of life. We've had one instance thus far. Drupal 6 reached end of life around 6 years ago. And Drupal 7 and 8's reaching end of life in a few months. 7 is reaching end of life in a year and a few months. This is a really difficult, perhaps controversial to some people, challenging topic. So maybe real quick, not everybody might understand what end of life is. Just in a brief overview, what is end of life and what is the difference between a current version of Drupal and how it relates to the security team and what happens when it crosses that EOL line?
So end of life is exactly what it sounds like. The product or service is no longer going to be offered. This happens for a variety of reasons. It's not unique to Drupal. It's a software phenomenon. If you're familiar with the software development life cycle, this is something that happens at some point. Software, reaches the end of its existence. We don't run Windows 3.1 anymore. And I will start that with saying there are actually some instances where people need to run Windows 3.1 because they've got some proprietary piece of hardware that only works with Windows 3.1. But if you walked into a store tomorrow and bought a brand new computer and it came with Windows 3.1, you would be a little concerned. Like, 1996 call. They want to know where their 286 is.
What is this little piece of plastic and what do I do with it? Like a floppy disk. I've never seen this before.
And so end of life is, the organization that makes the software is saying we are no longer going to support or maintain this software. This has been a discussion, with Drupal 6. We went through this process. Actually, at DrupalCon New Orleans, there was a mock funeral for Drupal 6, which was hilarious. You can go look up the mock funeral in traditional New Orleans style. Drupal 7 is actually scheduled to hit end of life this year, at the same time as Drupal 8. And we extended that by a year, mostly because of COVID and budget impacts and what was going to happen to people's sites as a result of the end of life and the impact that might have had. Maintaining old software is expensive. When you think about Drupal 7 has been out for a very long time. When Drupal 7 was released, the PHP ecosystem was vastly different than it is today. And so just running Drupal 7 on a modern PHP stack is not something that anybody, when Drupal 7 was originally built, had in mind. And so we are end-of-lifing the product. That effectively means that the security team will no longer provide coverage for the product. If a security issue comes into the Drupal security team, the security team itself won't address that. I'm going to put a star on that and come back to that in a second. The core maintainers will no longer be committing new features or bug fixes to Drupal 7. So when PHP 9 or 10 comes out, yes, I said PHP, not Drupal, 9 or 10 comes out, the core maintainers will not be fixing Drupal 7 or Drupal 6 or Drupal 5 to work with those new versions of PHP. Now, having said that, it is a fact that people are running large, complex, massive systems on Drupal. And us end-of-lifing it is problematic for their business. And so, I go back to the folks that are still running Windows 3.1. And, I don't actually know of anybody running Windows 3.1. I do know of a large group of folks that run Windows 98, though. And there's a couple folks that are still running, Windows 2016 Server, which is end-of-lifed. And Microsoft actually will sell you services to continue to maintain that. And the cost of those services goes up as time goes on. Because, when there's 100,000 people buying that service, okay, there's, we can pay a couple engineers. When it's 5,000 people buying that service or 5,000 companies buying that service, well, okay, the cost to pay those engineers is now significantly more because there's less people paying. Drupal 6 did a long-term support vendor agreement where we had vendors who worked with the security team. Tag1 was one of them, or is one of them. There are still customers who are using Drupal 6 and who are paying one of the, I think, three vendors, it may be down to 2, who are, it started at 4, who are providing Drupal 6 support for these folks that cannot move on because they've got business processes that are tightly integrated, and the cost to pay a vendor is worth it to them. We will be doing the same thing with Drupal 7. Tag1 is also a Drupal 7, we're calling it extended support vendor. And so as a company, you can go to one of these vendors and you can basically say, this is my site, this is what I have. And the vendors have a variety of services, everything from notification about releases to the vendor logging into your site and actually patching your site for them, and everything in between. And so there's an application to become a vendor, and you go through this process. And so when a report comes in, the security team, we will coordinate with the vendors who may decide to fix the problem or may decide not to fix the problem and make it public. And, you might say, well, wait a minute, how do I know if they're going to fix the problem or not? I'm not paying them. How do I know if they're going to fix the problem? Well, if one of their sites of a paying customer is impacted, they will likely fix the problem. So, if a highly critical, mass exploitable vulnerability for Drupal 7 gets reported, it'll go to the extended vendors and they will almost certainly fix that. If, an edge case gets reported or a stress case gets reported where, it affects 1% of 1% of Drupal sites and none of their customers' sites are in that percentage, then they're not going to fix the problem, even if it's a critical issue. And so, the security team was pretty successful in doing this with the Drupal 6 environment, and we've replicated that for Drupal 7.
We're not, the extended support providers are not replacing the security team so much as augmenting them, because one, many of the people, well, you have to be on the security team to provide this service. So you're just getting paid to do it as opposed to, volunteering to do it, which is necessary because of all of what you described, right? It's, the use case, there's so few people using it that if you want this, you should pay for it. But, I think what I really wanted to point out there was, the security team is still there. While you guys are not driving this process, you're involved in it, you're aware of it, and so, I don't know how active you are in it because, again, it's a black box to me. I'm not allowed to know these things. But it seems like there's some level of coordination, if not just because a lot of the vulnerabilities that are like trickle down. So a vulnerability in 8 or 9 impacts, 7 or 6. By that nature, you have to be involved. And if something's discovered in 6 or 7, it might trickle up. And so, it's not like you guys walk away and are like, whatever, 7, it's just that you're not, owning and driving, it the way that you normally do.
So the first thing we do when we get a report for an end-of-life version of Drupal is we validate that it does not exist in a supported version of Drupal. Mm-hmm. And so, if a vulnerability comes in and it exists in 8 or 9, then it's our process and we work with the extended support vendors, but it really goes through our normal processes. If it's just a 7 only thing, the extended support vendors really own that process. We will not publish a security advisory about it. The fixed code doesn't actually even go into the canonical Drupal repo. It will go into another repo, or the patch gets posted to an issue. Like, the way that happens is up to the vendors, but there's some of the tooling that we have that won't be there. So for example, if you want to, right now, if I do a security release for Drupal 7, we have a test bot that runs. That test bot will not be available once Drupal 7 is end of life. Why? Because we're saving the money on the infrastructure to run the test bots.
That thing runs a lot. I don't like people like, I really don't think people understand the scope of Drupal. I mean, that thing did something like 10 concurrent years of testing in a single year, like a decade worth of effort. Like you're talking about a massive, massive AWS bill. That's just not sustainable. So that, that has to be decommissioned.
And we'll continue running tests for Drupal 8 and Drupal 9, but we can't support running tests for every version of Drupal. Having said that, the infrastructure behind that test bot is available to the vendors, and honestly, everything about it is open source anyhow, so anybody could recreate that test bot if they wanted to. The tests are in the canonical Drupal repo. But a lot of the procedures, the policies, the tooling goes away, because in some instances, this is now up to the vendors to handle that level of support. And so, a vendor might have a contract with a major, organization that says, look, this is what we need, and the vendor may agree to it. And the vendor is that's a contractual business relationship between the vendor and that company. The security team isn't really involved. We do remind the vendors that for issues that do impact a supported version of code, which may not be core, it could be, a module that is in both 7 or 8, 9, or 10, and 7 or 6, that our processes and procedures come into place before, if it impacts a currently supported version. But in some ways, there's a lot of the vendors have the authority to say, we're not going to fix this. We're going to make this issue public. That's within their call, and they have to all agree to do that. And the other thing we did is we put in rules about vendor participation. We wanted to make sure that vendors who are part of this program are actively fixing issues. Because it is, the vendors get to self-organize for a little bit, but we do have some rules in there that basically, say, well, you can't become a vendor and then not fix anything. Like, that's not cool, because then all the other vendors are doing the work.
So as far as for long-term support for Drupal 6, I think that my Drop Wizard, Tag1, like vendors came together and proved that this model can work really well. So I think that organizations that are on Drupal 7 and looking for extended support should rest assured that, one, it's going to be available, and two, it's going to be available for a really long period of time. Drupal 6 extended support is still available. It's been around for, I think, Drupal 6 went end of life 6 years ago now, almost 5 years ago. We had a big enterprise, $1 billion corporation, reach out to us yesterday asking for Drupal 6 support. Like, people are still contacting us and asking for Drupal 6 support, and it's still available. So if you're on 7, you should be able to run 7 for another 7 years with Drupal extended support from vendors. I did a DrupalCon talk with help from Michael. You can check it out at tag1.com/EOL for end of life, which explains the whole model, how it works, what it'll do. But since I have you here, Michael, I think one of the controversial things, and I have a strong opinion on this, but I want to get your perspective. Drupal 7 is by far the most popular release of Drupal ever. There are more sites running Drupal 7 than every other version of Drupal combined. And I think a lot of people are wondering, why would you end of life, the most loved and popular version of Drupal?
Well, it's not my call. I'm not the one who's deciding to end of life it. So
why are you doing
I don't know
this?
the answer to this. It's actually a really complex question. Part of it is that Drupal 7 is running in many, many different environments. And this goes back to my, site persona thing from earlier, in that, there is the persona of, I set up my site 7 years ago, I keep it updated, haven't touched it, it's not complicated, but I also don't want to take the time to upgrade. But, I've got 100 nodes and 7 modules, and, it's my site, it works. There's also I've built my entire business around it. There's 100 million lines of custom code in this. It is my ERP. And so, those are kind of the two opposite ends of the spectrum here. At some point, the person who set their site up 7 years ago, their host is going to upgrade them out of Drupal. The amount of work it takes to keep chasing PHP versions and, without breaking old code gets complex. And that's a lot of work. the group that's run their entire ERP on it, they're going to have somewhat of the same issues. If they're using PHP 5.3, please don't be using PHP 5.3 first of all. But if you're using PHP 5.3, like that's a lot of work there. Software, goes through this process. I don't know the exact dates, and I probably should have been aware of this. I think Drupal 7 has been around for a very long, like 10 years, I want to say.
Oh yeah. And the other thing is
longer.
It's been in development. I mean, it was in development for something like 4 years before it's official. Like its development life cycle was really long. So, it existed at least 3, maybe 4 years before its release. And it's been live for at least 8 or 9 years.
So it's actually, Drupal 7 came out in January of 2011.
Okay.
So the original end of life date was going to be 10 years after it came out. There's very few software packages that are supported for 10 years by any vendor. Yeah. And we've added a year to that. The PHP universe is moving towards what Drupal 8 and Drupal 9 look like. And so, there are competitors to Drupal, and I'm not going to say you should go use a competitor to Drupal, but, in the evaluation of what to do, some of that is reevaluating your use case. And is Drupal 8 worth the migration? I've got a lot of sites that have said, I built this site 10 years ago. I haven't changed it in 6. Like I can make this a static site. There's not a good answer here because, it's hard. Where do we balance resources? We have a finite number of people who develop Drupal at the, working on core. Where do we balance those resources on the current version of the software, which has, all sorts of modern day technologies built into it, or on the 10-year-old software that's got a lot of use? And so, one of the things that this came up with your question is why we did extend this. I know there were a lot of migrations that were planned to start right or were in progress at the time the pandemic started. And, we basically said, okay, we know these are going to cancel. We know budgets are going to get tightened. Well, let's extend this a year. But, we need to move forward from Drupal 7. That's where the software development processes are going to. What's your opinion on it? You said you had a strong opinion.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, check out my tag1.com VOL talk. I talk a lot about this, and I think the community is amazing, and I love the fact that the community said, look, COVID, the world's in a difficult place. We're going to give everybody yet another year. We've already extended. I feel like the community has gone out of their way to try and do everything they can. And what people have to realize is that we're like in our community hack capacity, we're largely volunteers. And so, you're talking about software that's, a decade old since release, 3 or 4 years in development. So I've been working with Drupal 7 for 13 years. Like people don't want to be working on 13-year-old software, like not in their free time and even paid, right? Like we excel and, progress in our careers because we are researching and learning the newest things. And so you can't rely on an open source community for support. And so I think that the model that we've put in place with this extended support program is a great blend, because the community shouldn't provide it, won't provide it. But putting this extended support program into place gives companies options. And again, like to me, Drupal is about freeing people from their technology, like the site builder role, layout builder. Drupal empowers non-technical people to control and manage their site, and it enables technical people to do so much more. So for me, Drupal is all about being in control of your technology. And what extended support does is it puts business in control of their technology. It says you can make a business decision to upgrade. It might be make your site static, make it, archive it, go to another, platform, or it could be pay an extended support provider to help you continue to run and maintain your site. You don't have to. Like, 7 is a great platform. If it meets your needs, and there's no business reason for you to upgrade, extended support is perfect. I don't think you should be held hostage by your technology. And so, I don't, I love that you don't have to upgrade. You can continue to run it, and that extended support is there for you to do it.
And it's not like we've got a kill switch in the software where on, the end of life date, all of your Drupal 7 sites will magically just stop working. Like, we don't do that. It's an open source platform. You can also choose to take the risk and say, okay, you know what? I haven't done a security update in 3 years since that last major one. I'm going to take that risk. And you're going to have, I agree with your initial reaction there, like, oh, please don't do that. But people are going to do that. That's the beauty of open source. When we talk about where funding in this community comes from, if you go look at the, Drupal.org marketplace, which is ranking people by their contributions to the platform or to the product, Drupal, or modules, or holding events, or any other ways in which people can contribute to this platform, of these, I see 2 vendors that do hosting and the rest build sites on clients. And I can't imagine that there's a lot of clients that are going to these vendors and saying, hey, I want a Drupal 7 site. Build me a Drupal 7 site. And I know Drupal 8 has all these wonderful APIs. I want you to build them from scratch in Drupal 7. Like, that's not happening. And so, the people who are getting who are actively working on projects on behalf of clients are building the new ones on the new services. And if you haven't updated to Drupal 8 because your concern here is, oh, well, I'm going to update to Drupal 8 or I'm going to upgrade to Drupal 9, and then in X number of years I'm going to have to do this massive upgrade and start over again. The upgrade process is no longer rebuild your site. When you went from Drupal 5 to Drupal 6 to Drupal 7, it was a quite painful process, which in some cases effectively required you to just start over. Like, you're going to start with installing Drupal, you're going to import your content, you're going to go find your modules, you're going to have to rewrite chunks of your custom code. Going from Drupal 8 to 9 can be as simple as just updating the code and running the migrations. Depending on what code you're running and what you're doing in there, it is not necessarily rebuilding everything. And so, that is one of the huge benefits of being on Drupal 8, 9, or 10, because you don't have this massive migration process that, was painful.
Yeah. So that leads me to another question. With the shift from 7 to 8, we went to semantic versioning and we changed our numbering, which is confusing to people. I mean, a good thing, but all of a sudden you're seeing like numbers advance quickly. 8's already 9, 9's going to be 10 in a year and a half. So the good news is that, it really is just a numbering scheme, and the upgrade process is really seamless. It's nothing like what it was. Upgrade paths are super easy moving forward, and that's phenomenal. That's a huge reason to be adopting, 8, 9, and 10. The longevity you're going to get out of it. But I've noticed, we're no longer supporting versions of 8. Things are happening, 8. Whatever no longer has security support. Can you give us a little insight into how security support works within the 8, 9, 10 ecosystem?
So there's major, minors, and patch releases. And so Drupal 7 is a major release, Drupal 8 is a major release, Drupal 9 is a major release, Drupal 10 will be a major release. The minor releases don't exist in 7, so let's take that off the table, are the releases that come after that. So 8.1, 8.2, 8.3, 8.4. The patch releases are 8.1.0, 8.1.2, 8.1.3. There's a graphic that I can show you for this that makes it a little easier to see what's happening. But basically, one of the benefits of the way we're running the release cycles is there is a very fixed structure to releases. With Drupal 7 and Drupal 8, how many times was Drupal 7 delayed when it was initially coming out? How many betas were there? There were not set releases. And by the way, that's not, I'm not criticizing the way we did things. It was ready when it was ready. What we're doing now is saying, okay, we have a very strict thing in place. if you want to get a new feature in, it has to be at this stage before we're going to actually think about releasing it this upcoming release. If it's not there, great, it gets pushed off to the next minor release. And so we've got this or major release, depending on what we're doing. And so because the upgrade path is easy, the changes between 8.6 and 8.7 to do that release is not difficult. And so, the upgrading between minors is relatively smooth. I'm not going to say it's been perfect. We've had one issue that I'm aware of, and maybe more than one, but where, there's been a headache involved. But, it's very clear what's in that minor release and what's not in that minor release. Whereas in the Drupal 7, the non-semantic versioning routes, if you're doing, I think we skipped like 10 points because we wanted to indicate there was a major change here. And so, we just skipped random, like it was completely arbitrary. And so, and I'll share the link to what this looks like so that you can share it with folks. This really spells out exactly how it works, when security coverage is, how long security coverage is for each minor after it's released, how the whole thing works. When we do betas, there's a fairly complex process in here for doing this. But what's great about this is that it's predictable.
Yep.
And so it's not when the volunteer maintainer has the time to do this, there will be a release at these times. And if you want to know what's in it, there is a change log that will show you what's in the releases. There are release notes, not log, I apologize, release notes that are detailed, that cover all the information that's in the releases. It is it is a much more predictable way of doing release management. But yes, we do unsupport the previous minor 6 months after the new minor's release. And so, effectively, if if I release 8.7 in May, people are still running 8.6, obviously. 8.7 is now the supported minor release. You get your support for 8.6 to do your upgrade through December. So you've got that time in there to go through and, do those, make that upgrade. And then, of course, you keep moving forward. But for the most part, I've got a lot of Drupal 8 sites that I'm responsible for. I think, I can count on one hand the number of issues with minor release updates. And, they're 99% of the time very smooth.
So the numbers are moving faster. The support windows are smaller, but the upgrade process is really easy. And it, for so many reasons, security being paramount, people should be keeping their sites up to date. And, I just wanted to bring it up because I think, it is, it's a lot to digest. It can be confusing. And it is, in fact, a really good thing, a really easy thing. Listen, Michael, you've been crazy generous.
I want to clarify with the security thing there. Every minor release gets security coverage for a full year.
Yep.
That's typically 6 months of it being the active release branch, and then 6 months when the next minor is released, we keep that minor in support. That's a predictable software thing. The other thing that's happening though is you're getting new features. You can choose not to use them, but you are getting new features with these minor releases, which, with Drupal 7, you got new features, like there's, it kept moving forward, but, you would get features, you get bug fixes, you get all sorts of things in one release, and it was hard to figure out what's going on there. This gives you a predictable time to test your release, to make sure you're happy with what you're going to release and that you're not, breaking things in unpredictable ways.
It's a much more mature model, I think.
Yep.
More predictability, planning, it's it's good on the whole. So Michael, you've been unbelievably generous with your time today. We went way over. There's so much more I want to ask you. This is, like I said, for a guy who's been involved in the community for a really long time, you gave me insight and answers to things that I've been wondering about for a really long time. So I hope that other people learned as well, as much as I did. I'd love to have you back in the future because there's, so many more things I wanted to cover. But this was great. Really appreciate you joining us.
Thank you for having me, and I'm happy to come back and talk about the stories of how Drupal.org almost used a commercial vendor whose name starts with an A for its Git provider instead of GitLab. That's a fun story. But thank you so much. Have a great evening and a good weekend, even though it's a Friday and I don't know when people are going to be watching this, but have a good evening.
Thanks, Michael. And for the folks who tuned in, we're going to put all the links in the show notes here. Please remember to upvote, subscribe, and share this out. You can check out our past talks at tag1.com/tagteamtalks. You can check out the end of life presentation I mentioned at tag1.com/EOL for end of life. As always, we love your feedback and suggestions. Let us know what you thought of the show, topic ideas for the future. You can reach us at Tag1 Team Talks at tag1.com. Thank you guys so much for tuning in and joining us today. We'll see you soon. Take care.